Thank you, Professor. When I came back to Myanmar for the first time after 21 years in exile, it was February 2012. At the time, the word federalism is still a taboo, the taboo lexicon. Nobody in the government dared to talk about it. And when I came back, after I quit my job in Afghanistan and I came back to support the peace process in Myanmar, it was October 2012. And I advocated for ceasefire monitoring in the peace process. At the time, some leaders in the military was a bit upset that I was telling the press that they should be monitored. It was over 2 years ago. And right before I came to this conference, we had a seventh nationwide ceasefire negotiations. In this document, the government agreed that the peace process will lead to a union based on democracy and federal principles. It is written. And on February 2012, the president, the representative from Tamador, and the Speaker of the Houses, Speaker of the Parliaments, signed the deed of commitment that said that this peace process will lead to a democracy and democratic and federal union. This is how things change just over 2 years. And in the current negotiation of the nationwide ceasefire agreement, the military overwhelmingly accept that there will be ceasefire monitoring nationwide. This is how the military also shifted its perspective on the peace process in 2 years. So let me start with this presentation here. Under the previous regime, there were altogether 40 groups that joined this the ceasefire process. At the time, the military government did not sign any documents except in a ceasefire with KIO, Kachin. Even with the KIO leaders were told to keep the documents secret. That even some of the KIO Central Committee members never see this document when it was signed. But now today, we have altogether 38 signed agreements, and it was distributed to the press. You can find it in anywhere. So this is some of the distinction between the past and present. So by the 2009, 25 groups remained. Some of the groups were completely disarmed, or some of them were incorporated as a government militia. Then by 2009, the government put pressure on these remaining groups to form a border guard forces, which is a government-affiliated paramilitary group. So 5 groups agreed to be transformed to paramilitary forces, a BGF, border guard force. The 15 were transformed into some sort of government militia. The 5 groups did not agree, but fighting did not break out, even though they disagree, except with the KIO. So by the time when this government initiated another peace process, the government has to deal with the 16 groups. But this 16 groups does not exhaust a list. When this government started this peace process, there was a very little guidance on which group they will talk. So the government divided 2 groups, 2 peace negotiators, 2 groups of peace negotiators to reach out to some armed groups. So they're altogether 16. But the government decided to close the list at 16 and decided not to bring in new groups to the peace process. So right now, the government currently recognizes 16 armed groups as the dialogue partner. So among the 16 groups, in 2011, there was a 4 ceasefire, 4 groups. In 2012, another 9 groups joined the ceasefire. In 2013, the ABSEF signed another ceasefire, and KIO and the government, even though they don't call it ceasefire, the 3 agreements signed between the government and the KIO even surpass some of the elements of the ceasefire signed with the other groups. So altogether, officially, out of 16 groups, the 14 groups have already signed ceasefire, and only 2 groups remain. One is a KIO and one is a TNLA. So this is a peace process roadmap. Right now, we are trying to achieve nationwide ceasefire agreement. There are a lot of misunderstanding from some of the analysts and some of the press. We are working on the nationwide ceasefire agreement not because there is no ceasefire. There has already been 14 ceasefire groups. There are 3 objectives of the nationwide ceasefire agreement. Number 1 is to make sure that the next government, whoever comes to power, should be carry forward the peace process smoothly. So number 1 objective is to cement a foundation of the peace process for the next government. And number 2 is to stabilize ceasefire. What we have is an initial ceasefire. We want to make it more comprehensive ceasefire. So to stabilize ceasefire is the second objective. The third objective is to initiate political dialogue. So with 3 objectives in mind, we are trying for a nationwide ceasefire agreement with the 16 armed groups. So once we have this nationwide ceasefire agreement achieved, the next step is a framework for political dialogue. That is about who's going to represent whom, what ratio of the representation, how the decision going to be made, what topics to be discussed, what is the time frame, what are the modalities of the political dialogue. All these issues will be discussed in the framework for political dialogue. And the next step, of course, it's a union peace dialogue. It's going to be like probably hundreds of people will involve in trying to determine the future of the country, how new Myanmar will be rebuilt under the peace process. So there will be a union peace dialogue. We don't know how long it's going to take, 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years, or 10 years. But once we have the peace accord, then the implementation is going to become another 5, 10 years. So the peace process, what we are talking about is not just this government, not just this administration. That could be another 10 years. That could be another 15 years. This is how we are projecting of the peace process. So under the current peace process, since this government comes to power in 2011, from January 2011 to December 2014, these are some of the data we collected from the open source. We did not use the classified data. So only from open source. What you see here is, this is for all 4 years, this is all states and regions. This is a figure. Then if we take out the Kachin state from the data, this is a figure we left out. If we take out Kachin and Shan state, this is a figure we left out. Meaning is, when this government came to power, most of the fightings are concentrated in Kachin and Shan state. So virtually, like the rest of the country, we observe relatively peaceful in other part of the area. In Kachin state, this is the data from the military. They declassified it. From June 2011 to December 2013, we observed about 1,450 clashes. So there's about, on average, 47 clashes per month. From January to December 2014, we only have 67 clashes in Kachin state, even if there was no official ceasefire between the government and the KIO. This is how peace process is coming into motion in Myanmar when it comes to a ceasefire. So these are the number of townships affected by armed conflict. This is 2011, initially when this government came to power. This is where we observe armed clashes. The southern port and northern port. In 2014, the number reduced, township number reduced to 28. And these townships in the south, even though we recorded, even like a 5 minutes, 10 minutes firefight, even without casualty, we recorded any clash. Even if we clash, we record minor clash. What we see here is in southern port, the virtually no heavy fighting. Some of the fighting is in southern port, like at one clash for the whole year. Or here is only one clash, two clash. Here is about 6 clashes. These 6 clashes is not necessarily between the government and the armed groups, among some of the armed groups as well. So what we can conclude under this government, except Kachin and Northern Shan State, the rest of the country is very peaceful. That is the data what we have collected. Even though we may not have the exact number of the clashes, but when we analyze at the township level, we can accurately determine which township is affected by armed conflict. So these are the number of townships affected by armed conflict. It was reduced from 43 to 28 in 2014. So when we show these data to some of the military commanders, they look at the data and they also recognize that 2014 is probably the most peaceful year in the country since independence. If you look at the number of clashes, the number of casualties from both sides, and number of collateral damage. So 2014, probably the most peaceful year in Myanmar history. But some of the problems continue. Even though there's a peace process, ceasefire is holding relatively well in most of the country, there are some spillover effect from the ceasefire and the peace process. So we collected some data from states and regions, from the state government, regional governments. These are the alleged illegal activities by the armed groups. As you see here, the biggest problem is extortions. The reason that the biggest problem is extortion is in Myanmar, we have 2 problems when it comes to the peace process. One is the question of how to feed those armed groups while they are on the peace process. We still don't have answer. We're talking about 100,000 armed personnels. We have to resolve how to feed them, how to take care of their welfare while they are joining the peace process. And number 2 problem we have is a war economy. We're talking about billions, war economy, drugs, natural resources, precious stones. So these are highly related to the civil war. Even if we can stop fighting, some of these problems will still continue. And even though we have only about the reduced number of clashes to over 23 or 32 townships, when we look at the townships affected by those, not by the fighting, but other activities, the spillover effect from the peace process, so we see the high, over 193 in 2014. So sometimes extortion we see well within, in the populated area. Also, from the government side, like some of the civil society groups also compile the violations by the government groups, so we have these data from the civil society, they publish reports. So even we look at these data, one thing we notice is like it's well reduced from the previous period. What is most significant is portering, forced portering. Like 5 years ago, whenever there was a heavy fighting, we're going to see the government troops will capture porters to carry ammunitions and rations. But we rarely see that kind of incidents after 2012. So this is my last slide. So when we started the nationwide ceasefire negotiation, altogether it's 104 issues. Then at the fourth meeting, we reduced to 8 issues remaining. And the last meeting, we reduced to only 1 issue. We have already sorted out 103 issues. And the meeting is going to resume on the 30th. So hopefully we can overcome the remaining 1 issue and finalize the draft for the nationwide ceasefire agreement. So let me stop by saying 4 elements I think the international community should pay attention. So once nationwide ceasefire agreement is signed, there will be joint bodies, like joint institutions. One is Joint Monitoring Committee, another is Union Peace Dialogue Joint Committees. So these 2 committees need to be supported and need to be functioned as quickly as possible. The Joint Monitoring Committee will facilitate the ceasefire, and the Union Political Dialogue Committee will facilitate political dialogue. The second is the international community should help Myanmar address the war economy issues effectively. That includes supporting and facilitating the welfare of the armed groups under the peace process. The third is to foster peace dividends in the post-conflict area. And the fourth is engagement with the Tamado, which is very critical. Without engagement with the Tamado, I don't think either the peace process or the political reform will move forward. Thank you.